Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to your Valentine's Views podcast for Monday. Ed Valentine, a Big Blue View here, along with Tony DelGenio, and we're going to be discussing Sunday's latest New York Giants debacle, loss to the Miami Dolphins. 1-4 start now, and obviously things aren't good. Before we get into it, please remember to like, share, and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. And please subscribe wherever you're listening to us across the Big Blue View Radio Network. All right, Tony, how are you this morning?
I'm doing okay, thanks. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm wearing a black shirt this morning because it's a Black Monday, I suppose. but Tony, 1-4, and it's not the record that's so distressing. It's how badly they continue to play. It's how non-competitive they continue to be. They don't look like an NFL football team.
Yeah, that's the problem. I think that most people probably guessed that the Giants would be 2-4 after 6 games, and of course we're guessing about next week. But I don't think I'd want to bet money that the Giants are going to win at Buffalo on Sunday night. Buffalo's going to be pretty mad after having lost to Jacksonville, on top of the fact that they're just plainly a better team than the Giants. But I think most fans expected, say, 2-4 at this point. And so, last week against Seattle, that game was the killer, because that game was the one game other than Arizona among these first 6 games that I thought the Giants could and maybe should have won if they really were aspiring to be contenders in the NFL. Losing to Dallas, losing to San Francisco, Miami, Buffalo, many people guessed that would happen, and the Giants' schedule gets significantly easier after the Buffalo game, and so you expected they could go on something of a run after that and get into the NFC race and the playoff race. But as you say, it's not just the fact that they're losing. I expected them to lose yesterday, and I think most people probably expected that even at the beginning of the season, even before they saw what this version of the Giants looks like. But as you say, this version of the Giants actually looks awful. Not so much on defense. I mean, if you can say that a defense that gave up 500 plus yards played a good game. Well, they didn't play a terrible game yesterday, considering how potent that offense is. The Miami offense has been doing that to almost everyone except Buffalo last week this season. It's really the offense that is just plain awful and completely non-functional, and that's the part that's really, really disappointing.
Agreed, Tony. Before we get fully into the offense, I want to say this. I think that had anyone that was realistic heading into the 2023 season had to realize that some regression was possible, if not inevitable. The Giants 9-7-1, 10-8-1 if you count the playoff games last year. Won a lot of games at the end. They were fortunate to win some games, really fortunate to win the Tennessee game. Some of the victories that they had over the Titans, maybe over the Packers, by the end of the season, maybe not as impressive as they looked at the time, simply because maybe we thought those teams were better than they actually were. Look at the playoff victory over the Vikings, and you and I have talked about this. You wrote about the comparison between the Vikings and the Giants in the offseason. The Vikings realized that they weren't a true 13-4 team. They weren't a true contender, and they basically started a teardown. The Giants looked at 9-7-1 and leaned into it and thought, we're a good football team already, and it just hasn't worked. But I think the point is we could have expected some regression, at least in terms of record. What we couldn't have expected was the regression in play, especially on the offensive side of the football. And that is what is absolutely 100% so distressing, is the absolute regression back to basically being non-functional and incompetent on offense.
Yeah, it's startling how inept they've been on offense, and I mean, to me, it's 90% the offensive line. The offensive line looks, I think, worse than it has ever looked in all the years that I can remember. I haven't seen the PFF scores yet for this week, though I checked this morning and they still weren't up. But what I did last night was I went back and looked at the team pass blocking PFF grades for entire seasons, and I looked to see which was the worst score in the NFL for a given season, going all the way back to, I think, 2006, which is as far as PFF goes. And there was one team, I can't remember, it might have been the 2016 Dolphins or something like that, that had a season long PFF pass block score of about 42 or something like that. The Giants went into, and that was the worst in whatever it is, 16, 17 years. The Giants, as of yesterday, before this game, were standing at something like 33.8. And they weren't even the worst team, actually. They were a little bit ahead of Pittsburgh, which was even worse, which is hard to believe. But here they are, looking like an all-time terrible pass blocking line. And who would have guessed that? Obviously, injuries are a huge thing. Not having Andrew Thomas at left tackle. I mean, you can say that's the direct reason that Daniel Jones that got hurt yesterday is because Andrew Thomas wasn't there at left tackle. All right. But naturally also John Michael Schmitz, who, the jury is out. He's only played a few games, but he at least looks semi-competent out there. And so having what might have been their two best offensive linemen out with injuries didn't help. But gee, the offensive line as a whole, and it's not just they're getting beaten, it's that they look like they have no idea what they're doing, what their assignments even are. Who's supposed to block which pass rusher when on particular plays. They look like they've never seen a stunt before. They look like they've never seen an outside speed rush before. And I'm at a loss to imagine how they can be this bad.
Absolutely, Tony, and that is something that we wrote about, in the post game at Big Blue View. Is just, it's one thing when you talk about injuries on the offensive line. Offensive coordinator Mike Kafka said last week that there's injuries across the NFL. Well, we watched Seattle on Monday night play competent offensive football with two backup offensive tackles. The Miami Dolphins were missing their best offensive lineman yesterday in Teron Armstead. We see it across the league where teams have to put backup guys in. And what I wrote was, yes, you get a talent drop off, but you shouldn't get a drop off in communication, in guys not understanding their assignments. You're going to get beaten sometimes. Backup players going to get beaten more often than the starter. That's just reality. But not understanding assignments, having so many free runners, not able to pick up these twists. We watched plays during the game yesterday where Evan Neal and Jalen Mayfield at right guard blocked the same player while a free runner came off the edge. What are these guys being taught? What's being communicated to them during the game about what the opponents are doing to them? That's what I don't understand. Maybe some of those things are on the quarterback. I don't know. But I also think, and I've said this before, and yes, Daniel Jones, before he got hurt, yes, he had regressed. We know that. Maybe he's not ever going to be what the Giants hope he will be. But I think that when you get hit and pressured and harassed as often as Daniel Jones does, it's natural for your play and your processing to regress. It just is. That, I think, is not really disputable. But but it's just mystifying to me, not only how overwhelmed they look, but how confused they look.
Yeah, and the thing is, if you were just taking this season in isolation, then you just say, well, these are just terrible offensive linemen, period, and they should all just be out of the league. But the fact is, even though we were dissatisfied with the Giants' offensive line last season, that offensive line looks like all pros compared to the way this offensive line looks. And there are a lot of the same people out there, and yet they somehow look worse this year than last year. And as you say, it's not just the physically getting beaten by opposing defensive lines. It's the confusion, and it's like, how can you have this much confusion? And I'm an outsider, so I don't know what's going on inside that locker room. I can't evaluate coaches, but it sure looks to me like they are a poorly coached offensive line. Now Bobby Johnson, who was there last year, he had reasonable success with the Buffalo Bills. They weren't the greatest offensive line in the NFL, but they were a slightly above average offensive line, and they had few stars on that offensive line. So he managed to have a functional offensive line for that team. Uh, what's happening now? What's changed? The only thing I can find that's tangible, and it's hard to believe that an assistant position coach could have so much impact, is that last year the Giants had Tony Sperano Jr. as their assistant offensive line coach. He went and took an offensive line coach position at Indianapolis, where, according to reports, he's doing a very good job there as OL coach, even though they've had injuries on the line. And he's been replaced by someone else. Was he the guy actually doing all the work with the linemen last year, even though Bobby Johnson is the guy whose face you see? And do they actually miss having this guy? I have no idea. I'm really at a loss to imagine how they can be as bad as they are right now.
Tony, I'm not sure how to answer that question, but it does lead us into a discussion of the coaching and about general manager Joe Schoen. And I think that it's absolutely clear that the honeymoon is over for Brian Daboll and for Joe Schoen. And I think that what it leads me to is some discussion of some of the decisions that have been made, specifically on the offensive line, but perhaps in other places as well. And I'm not going to sit here and say, as I think NewJersey.com wrote this morning, that Brian Daboll should be on the hot seat. I don't think that's the case. I think that the Giants have got to get off this 2-year merry-go-round. And Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll showed us a year ago that there's a path to success, that maybe they're the guys that can lead us there. If this season goes completely south, then in my view, I think these guys have to be allowed a chance to fix it, because you just go nowhere if you stay on this 2-year merry-go-round. So I think they're both going to be here for a while, but they both have a lot of questions to answer. And that starts with the idea of, whose idea was it that Josh Azudu is an NFL left tackle? All right. I don't understand it. They drafted him as a guard. They drafted him as a player who had played a little bit of left tackle and a little bit of right tackle at North Carolina, but they drafted him to play guard. And the idea that he can protect Daniel Jones' blind side, and yes, everything would be much better if Andrew Thomas was there, but the idea that they're putting a guard over there to protect Daniel Jones' blind side is eventually what got Daniel Jones hurt. And it bothered me, and I tweeted this last night. It bothered me that as soon as Daniel Jones got hurt, they yanked Josh Azudu and put Matt Peart in. Why? And I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to let you speak on it some before I get into it. Why is a guard playing left tackle when Matt Parrott, who is not a great player, but he is a natural tackle who has played some decent football for the Giants over the years. He's played some bad football, but he's played some adequate football too. Why is Matt Parrott not over there? So that's the first thing that I just don't get.
Yeah, and so just to start with your comment about the coaching situation, I agree with you that Brian Daboll needs to get 2 years, more than 2 years as Giants head coach. I think the only thing that could stop that is if Mara and Tish's hand is forced by some kind of a meltdown during the season, as Joe Judge had after one of the late losses, where he just went on a 10-minute rant where he almost absolved himself of any of the blame and claimed that he was doing a good job, and that players loved playing for him and wanted to come back here, and so on and so forth, and so on. But Joe Judge didn't have that much capital in the first place, because the best he ever did was the previous season when they went 6-10. Brian Daboll has taken this team to the playoffs, and actually to the divisional round of the playoffs in 1 year. You're not going to get rid of someone like that after one really bad season, unless they just do something themselves that makes them look like they're just in over their head. Okay. And he clearly was not in over his head last year. You think back in Giants history, Bill Parcells took over the Giants after Ray Perkins decided to leave and go back to college coaching. And I believe in his first, really, I can't remember whether he was the coach during the year where they had the walkout or not, 1982. I don't remember whether he was coaching them then, but 1983, which was, I think, his first real season, at least, coaching the Giants. I think they went something like 3-12 or something.
3-12-1.
3-12.
3-12-1 when in his first year as head coach. And Bill Parcells made some mistakes early in his tenure. I mean, Bill Parcells, as great a head coach as he eventually proved to be, Bill Parcells thought Scott Brunner was a better quarterback than Phil Simms.
Right. And that team had been to the playoffs under Ray Perkins in 1981. So again, throw out 1982, where you didn't have real players playing games part of the time, and part of the season was lost. They gave Bill Parcells another chance after a terrible 1983, even though he took over a team that supposedly was a playoff team, and it was a playoff team in 1981. And sure enough, in 1984, the Giants got back to the playoffs, and that was the beginning of a multi-year run of mostly playoff teams. A couple of years later, a Super Bowl, obviously, and then a couple of years after that, another Super Bowl. So you can't give up on a head coach too soon, even when you think they're making bad decisions. And as you say, putting Scott Brunner in as the quarterback, what was he thinking? And Phil Simms hadn't really established himself as the guy by that time. It wasn't really until 1984 that Phil Simms really, I think, convinced people that he could really be the winning quarterback for the Giants. But they had patience with Parcells, and I think that after, as you say, after 2 years of Ben McAdoo, and 2 years of Pat Shurmur, and 2 years of Joe Judge, I think John Mara, and especially, is very, very sensitive to this idea that they pulled the trigger too soon on coaches who are not succeeding. So I think Brian Daboll would have to do something really ridiculous before this season is over, in order to get himself kicked out. I think he'll definitely get a third year. And the larger question really is, to go back to your other question, what are they doing putting Josh Azudo in at tackle when they've got Matt Parrott on the team? And I mean, they seem to indicate, by what they do, that they have absolutely no confidence in Parrott as a tackle. But then I keep on going back to, why is Tyree Phillips not on this team as a backup tackle? He played for them last year and played reasonably competently. And how was it that they managed to think that they could let him go as backup at tackle on a team that doesn't really have a lot of depth? That's one I will never understand.
No, and to me, I was going to get into Tyree Phillips as well. To me, when I look at it, they chose, and I know Tyree Phillips is basically a tackle, but to me, they chose Shane Lemieux over Tyree Phillips. Shane Lemieux, a player that the coaching staff admitted they liked during the draft process in Buffalo. But Lemieux's a player who's done nothing in the NFL. And when he's gotten a chance, he's played badly, and he spent 2 years hurt, and he's hurt again. And you're absolutely right. The Tyree Phillips cut wasn't going to make or break the Giants' season, but it's still, one that's questionable. It's still one that deserves to be asked. And, that may be partially Joe Schoen. It may be partially Brian Daboll. It may be partially Bobby Johnson preference. I don't know. But it's hard to find quality backup offensive linemen in the NFL. And when you have one that plays competently, then it is mystifying as to why you would let that player go, especially a guy like Phillips who can play both tackle and guard. And the other thing, of course, that Joe Schoen has to be questioned about, and I get asked all the time in the Big Blue View mailbag, why doesn't Joe pay more attention to the offensive line? Why doesn't he do this? Why doesn't he just draft 6 or 7 offensive linemen one year and fix this thing, once and for all? And you can't do that because you're building an entire football team. And yes, you have to have an offensive line. My point is, in 2 seasons, he's drafted 4 offensive linemen. He's used first, second, third, and fifth round picks. He did sign Mark Glowinski, admitting at the time that he would have liked to have signed a higher caliber of player, but that's what he could afford. And Glowinski, by reputation, looked like a competent player. And it just hasn't worked out for Glowinski with the Giants. But I think it's fair at this point to look at Joe Schoen and say, did he draft the correct right tackle? Because Evan Neal, as much as we want Evan Neal to succeed, it's not getting better. Josh Azudu looks like a mess. And I worry that by playing him out of position, he's been a blubbering mess 2 straight weeks now in the locker room. Josh Azudu has, according to, I saw him on, after the Monday night game, and then, I saw him after one of the games the other day, and then, this past weekend he was said to be, crying at his locker because he had gotten Daniel Jones hurt. I worry that even if they try to put him back at his normal natural guard spot, I worry that they've already broken Josh Azudu. Marcus McKethan can't seem to stay healthy. John Michael Schmitz is hurt. I think John Michael Schmitz, there's got to be optimism about, but it's fair to look at Joe Schoen at this point and ask if he drafted the right players. We don't know the answer, but it's fair to ask.
Yeah, it's fair to ask. But this is also partly why I come back to this question of the coaching, and as you say, you've got a first round, a second round, and a third round, and a fifth round pick that you've drafted in 2 years, which to me I think should be enough, right? If you're averaging a couple of offensive linemen a year in the draft, then you should be able to over time put together a decent line. And yet there's not a single one of these. Well, again, as you say, let's leave John Michael Schmitz out of it. He's played a few games. He looked good in his first game, and we haven't had much of a chance beyond that to really evaluate him. But how can you have 3 other guys, all of whom look like they can't play in the NFL? And is it really that he's bad at identifying talent? But it's not just him, naturally. It's the entire scouting department that he's put together that supposedly scouts people, more extensively and leaves no stone unturned about every prospect that they get. Are they really not good, despite all of the overturn that he's put in their practices and how they scout players. God knows that they go out and scout players like crazy. I mean, Shane himself goes all over the place looking at players. They've always got guys at players' pro days and during games and things like that. So it's certainly not like they're not putting in the effort. They seem to be really doing a thorough job of evaluating players. But at some point, you'd love to hear somebody say, "How come, despite all of that work, you can't find one offensive lineman who's good? Is it, where is the problem in that group?" And I'm just at a loss. That's why I'm starting to come back to the coaching, because we have no direct information about it. But it's like, how can they evaluate players that poorly that they can't find a single competent offensive lineman?
It's a valid question to ask, Tony, and I think Bobby Johnson, just like Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll at this point, has a lot of questions to answer. I mean, we can look at scheme, and we can look at. To me, it took the Giants until this past Sunday against against the it took the Giants until this past Sunday to realize that they needed to lean into the running game, that they needed to at least try, throw the ball short, throw the ball quick, do what they had to do to try not to get Daniel Jones killed. And yet they still found themselves in a lot of long yardage situations where there were free rushers. I don't know if they didn't max protect enough, but schematically they just haven't done Jones any favors. And I know that Dan Orlovsky of ESPN has pointed out on several occasions that some of these things are on Jones. And yes, I'll agree with that. But the point that I've made is Jones has regressed, and I think Jones is regressing because he's getting hit so much, because he's getting flushed out of the pocket so much, because he's getting harassed so much. I don't know what kind of quarterback Daniel Jones is, but we're getting closer and closer with Daniel Jones to that ship having sailed. And if this season continues to go south and the Giants have a top 5 pick and they have a shot at Caleb Williams or Drake Maye, we might be there.
It's certainly possible, and you really, I keep on thinking back to Daniel Jones's rookie season when, yeah, he had all of the turnovers, okay, but he was an attacking quarterback under Pat Shurmur. Now, granted, Pat Shurmur was trying to make things easy for a rookie quarterback. He did mostly half field reads and things like that, right? And so he didn't make it too complicated. But Daniel Jones threw the ball downfield, quite a bit, and people complained about that offensive line for the Giants in I guess it was 2019, right? No, 2018 was Shurmur's first season. People complained about that offensive line being no good, but those guys look great compared to the offensive line that Jones has now. And Jones came out. I mean, his very first game, right? Everybody will remember, right? He came out, and even though he was getting pressured by Shaq Barrett, he threw the deep downfield pass to Slayton, and he would in Cincinnati he threw way downfield to Ingram the following year. He had a beautiful long touchdown pass to Darius Slayton the first game of 2020 against Pittsburgh when Joe Judge came in. So the guy can throw downfield, and when he first came up, they did enough of that with him. And yesterday, I mean, he did finally throw a couple of he threw a couple of nice deep passes. I mean, he threw a nice one to Darren Waller that I thought Darren Waller should have caught, even though the defensive back was getting a hand in there. But I thought that was a ball that was catchable for Waller and should have been a touchdown. He had another one to Darius Slayton that was just like a tiny little bit long, and Slayton couldn't get his feet down in bounds. But it was a pretty nice pass. So he can throw a deep ball, but you've got to have some time to do it, and you've got to feel you've got to have an attitude, I believe. And again, I've never played quarterback in my life at any level, not even Pee Wee. So I have no idea what it's like back there. But I would imagine that if you play quarterback, you've got to drop back with the attitude that I'm going to attack this defense. And if you're dropping back with the attitude that this defense is attacking me instead, then yeah, you're not gonna want to take chances. You want to try to gonna want to try to get the ball out as soon as possible because you might get hurt. And this is twice that he has gotten hurt.
And we are seeing instances with Jones now where he's not reading defenses properly, where he's not seeing the rush, where maybe he's not setting the protections properly. I know Dan Orlovsky keeps pointing that out. And I think these are things that I think Jones showed a year ago that he can do. But you start to wonder if, if he's just, if the way things are going, you start to wonder if it's ever going to work the way that it needs to work. You start to wonder if he's broken, and you start to wonder if they can fix it. And him getting hurt yesterday, as I wrote at Big Blue View, was absolutely inevitable. And you just do start to wonder whether the Giants are, if they're in that position, if they have to draft a quarterback. And I will admit, I haven't studied the quarterbacks. I really don't know. I'm sure some of our listeners and viewers know who some of the guys are beyond Caleb Williams and Drake Maye. I don't know that at this point, but it's at that point where you have to start to consider, that as a legitimate possibility down the road, unless they turn things around in the second half of the year and sort of take themselves out of that discussion. But you do have to start to think that the clock is ticking, and maybe it's just never going to work with Jones here in New York.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's amazing how quickly your point of view can change about things, because I've been thinking all along that this year Jones is going to show that he's the guy, and then my thought behind that one in my brain was, well, if he's not the guy, what are they going to do about it? Because they're not going to be in position to get one of the top quarterbacks in the draft. Now I can see how much things have changed because I was watching the Chicago-Washington game on Thursday Night Football, and I was rooting for the Bears to win, not only because they're playing Washington, a division foe, but also because I'm saying, okay, great, Chicago, get a victory on the board. And now I find myself rooting for Carolina too, and because Chicago has Carolina's draft pick
Yeah,
also, and so Chicago could be drafting 1-2 in the draft and have their pick of quarterbacks. And it's like, and I'm thinking to myself, my God, I'm actually thinking about the Giants being in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. It's like how far things have gone south when you think that they might actually have a chance at someone like that. The only thing I will say is that right now the 2024 quarterback class looks like it might be pretty deep. Obviously, Caleb Williams is the star, and Drake Maye maybe just behind him. But there are a bunch of other kind of intriguing quarterbacks out there. Naturally, people have gotten very interested in Shedeur Sanders. There's also Bo Nix and Michael Penix, and who am I? I'm leaving out a few others that I think are probably higher rated than they are. But there's probably a list of about half a dozen quarterbacks that people might think are NFL caliber coming out of that draft. And so imagining the Giants having a top 5 draft pick this year all of a sudden doesn't seem that outlandish. And I would agree that if they do, and if there's a good quarterback prospect there where they draft, they probably have to go do that. And it's a shame to have to do that, but maybe that's where they'll wind up.
No, nobody wanted to be there, but that's where they might be. And I'm sure we'll discuss that a whole lot more going forward. Tony, I don't know about you, but I don't think I can talk about this game and this 1-4 start anymore. So I think this is a good spot for us to wrap it up.
Okay, that's fine with me. The only thing I will say is I was glad to see them finally play Eric Gray.
This is true.
If
Yes.
after 4 games, and it's like, what are you keeping this guy on the shelf for? And to me, Eric Gray looked okay. I thought he made some nice cuts. He didn't go down easily. He had yards after first contact, and so I thought, okay, this guy might be a viable running back. Not like the two guys on the other side of the ball yesterday. I mean, and that's the one thing you always have to keep in mind when they have a game like this, that Miami just has an amazing offense. I mean, I don't think Tua Tagovailoa is the greatest quarterback in the world. I don't think he even played that great a game yesterday, but first of all, he's got maybe the best receiver in football in Tyreek Hill, and Jalen Waddle is a great number 2 to have after him. And then he's got 2 running backs. I mean, Shane, it looks like I don't know. I mean, he could be rookie of the year. I mean, he just looks like an outstanding running back. And Mostert, of course, is no slouch either. So they have tremendous talent on offense, and they've got a head coach who really knows how to scheme his offense to maximum effect. So that was going to be a tough road for the Giants, no matter how well they played yesterday. And so that's my one consolation that I take from that. But I don't look forward to next Sunday night either. That could be the Buffalo Bills could be in a very bad mood and might take it out on the Giants.
That's funny. As I said last week, I have personal reasons for wanting to make the Buffalo trip, but I'm not making the Buffalo trip. I'm not going because I'm not subjecting myself to what is a 5-hour drive both ways, considering the state of affairs and the fact that I think it's absolutely justified for the Giants to be more than 2 touchdown underdogs, according to our partners at DraftKings. So I'll be staying home on Sunday night.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like worth making the trip for. I feel for all those Giants fans out there who travel to these games, and I think I underestimated how many Giants fans travel to these games. I mean, I notice at road games you always see a lot of blue shirts in the stands. I always just assumed that most of those people were people who lived in the city where the game was being played, and they decided to take the opportunity to come out. But actually, there are a lot of Giants fans who get on planes and go cross country or down to Florida, places like that, to see the Giants play all the time. I really feel for those people who devote so much of their time and money to be there for the Giants every game, or at least some of their road games. They're just not getting their money's worth so far.
No, they're not. And Tony, that is a good place for us to end. So, Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there, take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.